All right, so Ray Dalio, amongst many others, are saying, be careful, look out for inflation. It's coming, it's coming. 1970 styles inflation is coming, says a guy named, I think it's Don Fuss. Let's dive into this, shall we? Because I take issue with it to some degree. All right, so here's Ray Dalio, inflation is coming, do this now, from the Cooper Academy. This always, anytime you see this, do this now, it's always clickbait stuff. I'm telling you, look, if you follow search engine optimization, click-through ratios and all that, CTR, click-through rates and whatnot, do this now. This is the one thing to prepare you against a pandemic, blah, blah. It's classic, it's classic. But anyway, so Ray Dalio in this video here said that in the 1930s, we had no interest rates. Or interest rates were zero, he said. I said, really? So let's check into that, shall we? And we're going to read a little bit on this too by Dan Fuss. So let's check into Ray Dalio if we really had no interest rates or zero interest rates. So we're going to go to my spreadsheet here if I can. Hold on just a second. Let me pause. This is from Robert Shiller's stuff from Yale University. And Schiller is the Mac of all daddies when it comes to keeping the data of the S&P 500, the dividend, the earnings, CPI, long interest rate. Now he calls it the long is GS, the government 10-year bond. All right, so the government 10-year bond. So Dalio says inflation's coming. Then he references what we were going through in the Great Depression, where we had zero interest rates in order to stimulate, i.e., inflate the economy. So let's take a look if that's true. So the first thing we got to do is we got to make sure that we're tracking with real numbers. All right, so we're going to go all the way down. And again, Schiller's stuff is readily available for anyone who wants it. And we're going to see June 20th, the 10-year bond was at 0.88. And I just want to make sure that's what I'm looking at correctly. So I'm not pulling stuff down my you-know-where, my derriere. I'm looking at the 10-year treasury on my computer, on my phone, I should say. And I'm looking in June. Let's go to 3 months. And we'll look at June 20. And we'll see, yes, indeed, it was around 0.88 at that point. In fact, if we look at June 8th, it was 0.88. Exactly. So this number is a 10-year bond, all right? The nice thing about Schiller stuff is it goes month by month by month. And what you're going to see here, I know it's not that easy to see. I guess I can make it a little bit bigger. Let's see. There we go. What you're going to see as we go down to the Great Depression times of 1929 to 1930. So he said, Dalio said in 1932, the Fed had no interest rates. There is none. Well, if we look at Schiller stuff, here's a 10-year bond. Here's 1932. Now, that's not true. 3.5, 3.59, 3.62, 3.6, 3.6, 3.6. I don't see any time at all we had no interest rates in 1932. I guess you could say the Fed funds rate. I don't know what he's saying, but I see 3% across the board for interest rates during the Great Depression. I don't see no interest rates at all. So how's he saying there's no interest rates when in fact we had interest rates, if that makes sense? I mean, look at it, man. If we go back to the great reset, the great inflationary times of the 70s, if we see 6, 7, 7, 8, 7, 8, 8, 7, we're going to go up to 8.5. 15 right here, 19 basically starting in 1979 to 1982. No, going back to 1985 is when we had the high interest rates. And then we can go down now and we can say we are in the less than 1%. And right now the 10-year is trading at 0.7%. All right. So inherently, that's there is the idea that the interest rates are zero in the 1930s as a way to stimulate inflation, and if it worked, it certainly did not. And secondly, the idea that interest rates are anywhere near where they were in the 1930s now is just silly. So we're in a very unique environment for sure. All right, so let's actually, does he got on here? Let's bear with me just a second. Consumer Price Index, that's a CPI, but I think you got to look at your own. So if we look at, and I've done this, I'm not going to probably take a moment today to do this, but look, if we look at CPI, we start in 1871 at 12.46, then we go to 12.56 in 1873. So you can see, and then we go to 11.5, 10.28, down to 8 point. You see deflation across the board, man. It's 7. Look at that, huge deflation going into 1890s. You can see, look at 6, crazy. That's just straight deflationary times. The Federal Reserve came, 1913, I believe. So let's go to 1913. 9.8 in 1913, and we're going about right about here, 10.9 3 years later. Not much inflation over the course of that time. Then we have World War I, and then we go back to 17 with the deflationary times after the war. 17, 17, 17, 17, 17, 17, 17, 17 to 15 to 12 to 13. Now we're starting to pick back up with 14, 14, 13 again. You see how that is. What the issue there, oh, thanks, buddy. The issue is there, we didn't have any major inflation at all. So we go all the way down to here now. We can see the CPI is starting to kick in pretty good. All right, so let's go down to the 1970s where we had the big inflation. Hold on just a second. All right, so we started in 1972, at the end of 1972 at 42.6, and we go down to, we're going to 1985 at right there, 107. So basically we went from 42 to 107, which is a 2.5 times increase in CPI over 10 years time. Hold on a second. We had Pablo join me, and just remember, anytime Pablo comes, you got to smash the like button with your paw. Paw the like button. Say, Pablo is your sign to always smash the like button anytime you see Pablo. There's his paw proof. All right. So that I just, look, man, Dalio can, to compare, I just don't know. I mean, no one knows. All right, so let's read this. Prepare for 1970 style inflation. This guy, Dan Fuss. And the problem with this is, I actually read this article. It has nothing to do with prepare for 1970 style inflation. It's nothing, which is kind of frustrating because that is the headline, which I guarantee Dan Fuss would say. I didn't say that. So anyway, so Dan Fuss, one of the world's best known bond investors, will be the first to tell you he's confused about the markets, but count him in as a camp that doubts the U.S. is headed for a V-shaped recovery. He is confident, however, the long-term outlook includes a 1970 style inflation. He spoke during a webcast the other day with the Professional Risk Managers International Association. One thing I do know, he says, is just from looking at what the analysts are saying, in particular, talking to some of the loan analysts, credit fundamentals are not good. Hopefully this recovery will be a V, but it looks to be more like it's possibly going to be a W, or even along those lines. The closest historical analogy is to what is happening more than 60 years ago. During 1957, another Asian flu, the U.S. slipped into recession and was recovering by the 1958 and then back in recession by 1960. He says, I think there's all one downturn. It just started to ripple through. It never felt like there was magnificent recovery, blah, blah, blah. Then this guy, Emsbo Mattingly, also questioned Wall Street prevailing sentiment. So I don't know who that person is. Who's Ems? Oh, he was joined by an economist with Fidelity Investments. Okay. So what Fuss said had nothing, doesn't sound at all like he said 1970 style inflation. So here's the economist from Fidelity. She says the markets have basically priced in a V-shaped recovery. I'm a little bit skeptical. Okay. Next year, she said the economic picture may not be any clearer. The U.S. is running about 19% fiscal deficit. That's actually a fiscal tightening for next year as we cut back on government spending. It may be a recovering economy, but I think it might be just as confusing in 2021 as 2020. Let's see. She talks about, what was that? Neither Fuss nor Mattingly expect negative real interest rates to disappear anytime soon. Okay. In addition to geopolitical and issues in the pandemic, Fuss believes civil unrest is a shorter term risk and climate change is a longer term one. Oh, for the love of Mary, man. All these Wall Street, this is why I don't have any problem taxing hedge funds, transaction tax, because all these people are trying to separate you from your freedom. They're all climatistas. We got to worry about climate change because when you got that much money, and you live in your gated communities, you don't care about what the rabble-rousers are doing. You buy into the theory that climate change is going to kill you. And you're like, I can't have that. So if I stop flying, but notice, do they do it on Zoom? On this, let's see, a webcast, yeah. But I guarantee they're still fun all over the country, all the world. All right, so a rising debt brought on by massive government spending raised a lot of questions, and one of those is whether to lead inflation. Global debt as a share of GDP is at almost incomprehensible levels, and many people argue the only way you can deal with that is with inflation. All right, well, that's not happening in Japan. How do you argue that? How do you offset that? It's not happening in Japan. It hasn't happened in Japan. There's no evidence it will happen in Japan, and they have huge debt to GDP, more than any other country out there. Inflation is most likely coming. They just don't know when. Fuss believes when inflation does arrive, it will feel similar to the inflationary experience in this country during the 1970s and 60s. I think it's going to get out of hand. So the question becomes, how can an individual central bank in this question in the U.S. control it? I think it's going to be. I doubt we can get a Volcker in there. I doubt we can do that again, Paul Volcker. He added, inflation may not be the biggest problem facing the U.S. I do think inflation is coming. I just don't think we're going to see it anywhere near at hand. And if this U.S. and China thing doesn't get resolved, it'll be irrelevant. All right. So he's concerned about climate change and the commies nuking us. All right. So that he says if it does come, it'll look like the 1970s. Okay. Well, that's thanks. That's very prescient. The whole thing with inflation, man, it's like I don't get it. Everyone and their mom are like, oh my God, it's coming. Watch you lock the doors, watch your daughters. It's crazy. I mean, like, I don't know. You don't know, but to say what Dalio said based on the 1930s, that there's no evidence at all that the interest rates are zero, at least according to Schiller, 10-year treasuries. Right? Again, I don't know what Fed funds rate was doing back then, but Fed funds rate has been zero for years now, essentially. Here, it hasn't been inflationary. There's no evidence that debt in the government sector leads to inflation. There's no evidence of that. Yes, there is. You can make a correlation if you want, because you can say, look, here and here. It's kind of like the 7 Nations study that Ansel Keys did. You can make these correlations, but if you dive into it, there's no causation because of those correlations. One thing does not lead to the other. It's not. If I drop this, watch, whoop, it dropped. Watch, I'm going to drop it. That's gravity. We know gravity. If you have something with mass and you drop it, it will fall to Earth. That's gravity. There is a correlation and it's a causation. And gravity causes this to drop every single time. Now, if it didn't drop, the only reason it didn't drop is because I am holding it up. That's it. But if I let go, it drops every time. Inflation is, you cannot say there's a correlation between government spending and inflation. No, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. You can't say there's a correlation between low interest rates and inflation. Sometimes not. It is not gravity. You can't say there's any evidence of hyperinflation or at least high inflation like the 70s. We've had one period of that in the U.S. That's it. Everything else has been deflationary or low inflation. So to say, oh my goodness, this is like a hyperinflation. Anyway, just breathe easy, man. Breathe easy. Don't make structure changes to your portfolio because of Ray Dalio and hedge fund managers like this. It's nuts to me. And I just don't understand why everyone's like, they're right. It's coming. It might, but it might not. So what do? You look out the window. There's a window. I'm looking at it because we don't know. Pay down debt. All right, we'll see you.